Bunny Wailer warned Peter Tosh, but he didn't listen. Then the unthinkable happened. The explosive truth behind reggae's deadliest feud, the curse that followed, and how cutting off Bunny led to a home invasion that changed music forever. The evidence they've hidden for decades is finally out. Watch before this gets taken down. Peter Tosh was a man constantly walking the tightrope between genius and fury, between messiah and martyr, between rebellion and ruin. On the outside, he radiated the towering confidence of a prophet who wielded his guitar like a sword against Babylon. But on the inside, he was crumbling, isolated, betrayed, and financially strangled by the very industry he once swore to liberate. In 1987, the visionary behind equal rights and legalize, it was a shadow of his former self, emotionally tormented and clawing for relevance. After years of creative stagnation and fruitless battles with EMI America, Peter Tosh desperately sought to stage a comeback. The Madison Square Garden tour he dreamed of wasn't born from ambition. It was born from hunger, from a brutal admission to his closest friends that he was broke. Alongside him was his common-law wife, Marlene Brown, whose name stirred as much controversy as Peter's lyrics once did. Tosh had become a ghost in his own homeland. His voice had faded from Jamaican airwaves. Once surrounded by the musical vanguard of Kingston, now only silence and side eyes remained. And that silence spoke volumes. Fellow musicians had turned their backs on him. Peter's venomous denunciation of Bunny Wailer, his former brother-in-arms in the Wailers, was not just a feud, it was a public excommunication. Tosh accused Bunny of degrading reggae's sanctity by dabbling too deep in dancehall, branding his contributions as a betrayal to the genre's spiritual roots. The man who once harmonized beside Bob Marley now stood alone, dismantling the house they built together, brick by bitter brick. He declared all dancehall DJs to be District John Crows, carrion feeders scavenging the remains of reggae's revolutionary soul. The anger didn't stop there. It never did. Peter turned his wrath upon Keith Richards, the Rolling Stone who had once lent him a Jamaican villa and an opportunity to rise beyond his borders. But Tosh's paranoia metastasized into resentment. He accused the Stones of stifling his international success. That accusation boiled into outright hostility when Peter squatted in Keith's house without notice and refused to leave, insisting the place was now his. Even Keith Richards had his limits. When Tosh was finally forced out, he was banished, not just from the villa, but from Rolling Stone's records entirely. He had burned yet another bridge, with gasoline-soaked poetry and a matchstick temper. He was bleeding out emotionally and financially. Custody battles over his youngest child had left him hollow. His house had been reduced to ashes by arsonists just the year before. Now he lived in a lavish bungalow in Barbican. But even that symbol of success was haunted. His circle had withered down to a few loyal spirits: Michael Robinson, Wilton Doc Brown, Jeffrey I. Dixon, Carlton Santa Davis. And then there was Marlene Brown, his tempestuous companion, whose very name stirred distrust, scorn, and rumors of obeah, Jamaican spiritual sorcery. On September 6, 1987, Peter Tosh returned to Kingston after another failed attempt to resuscitate his career in the U.S. His house, nestled in the comfort of an upper-middle-class suburb, still stank of dread. Before the trip, he had complained that the grounds smelled like death. Marlene dismissed the worry, but Tosh had always felt things others couldn't. Within hours of their return, that dread materialized. Their first visitor was Dennis Lepo Laban, a former street hustler turned dub poet, a man with a criminal past as deep as Peter's discography. Lepo wasn't just a visitor. He was a ghost from Peter's past, dredged up from the slums of Crescent Road with a smirk and a demand for money. Peter had known Lepo since the 70s. He had given him money over the years, sometimes out of compassion, sometimes out of obligation, always with a tight-lipped reluctance. But on that muddy September morning, Lepo wasn't looking for friendship. He claimed that Marlene's brother had failed to uphold a deal, and he wanted repayment. Marlene, already on edge, snapped. She told Lepo flatly she didn't want anyone dead. It was a chilling line, made all the more haunting by what followed. 5 days later, Lepo returned. He arrived just after sundown on September 11th. This time he brought a storm. The man who had once been sentenced to over 25 years of hard labor for robbery and assault now stood in Peter Tosh's home once more, acting as if time and forgiveness had absolved him. It hadn't. By the end of the night, 3 men would be dead. Peter Tosh was eliminated inside his own sanctuary. Wilton Doc Brown lay lifeless beside him. Jeffrey I. Dixon clung to life for 3 days before succumbing in a hospital bed. Lepo had orchestrated it all, and he did it, according to whispers, because the obeah surrounding Peter had dried up the financial well. No more favors, no more cash, no more Peter. "You're dead for this tonight," he had spat. The scene was chaos. The man who had once roared, "I am that I am," now lay silenced. When the authorities began hunting for next of kin, they found only shadows. Friends said that Peter had not seen either of his parents in more than 2 decades. It was Detective Sergeant Hugh Miller who picked up the pieces, documenting a massacre fueled by betrayal, mysticism, and a legacy spiraling into darkness. 3 days after the shooting, the death toll rose with Dixon's final breath. And then came the family, torn, fractured, and full of fire. When Peter's mother, Alvera Koch, came to the Barbican house to speak with Marlene Brown, she was met not with sympathy, but with vitriol. Marlene blamed her for abandoning Peter. The funeral became a tug-of-war between blood and bond. Alvera wanted her son buried in Belmont, Westmoreland, his birthplace. Marlene, clinging to her grief and control, had already planned for Duffcott Memorial Park in Kingston. When the Prime Minister's office intervened, Marlene lost all legal rights to the body. She seethed, mocking the Westmoreland grave as a resting place beside a pigsty. Alvera calmly corrected her, citing a distance of 3 chains, 66 feet, from any livestock. But the damage was done. The bitterness was carved into every eulogy. On September 25, 1987, the Kingston National Arena transformed into a temple of mourning. Thousands came to pay homage to the Bush Doctor, but even in death, he was contested. 2 men emerged, each claiming to be his father. One, Alfred McIntosh, sided with Marlene. The other, James McIntosh, was validated by Alvera as the true patriarch. James said he had reconciled with Peter in secret, that they had spoken on several occasions in the final years. But reconciliation didn't stop the rising tension. Kingston was on edge. Fear lingered in the air, and it wasn't over. On October 2nd, 1987, Marlene Brown claimed she had narrowly escaped an ambush at her home. As she parked her car, 4 armed men opened fire with M16 fire weapon and vanished into the night. Her survival did little to calm the flames. Lepo, meanwhile, was dragged before the court. Despite his denial of involvement, despite the aura of mysticism and paranoia that had long surrounded Peter's final days, the evidence pointed to one man. The survivors, the driver, the stories, they all converged like notes in a dirge. Lepo was sentenced to death by hanging. But even that verdict couldn't silence the ache. Peter Tosh wasn't just a casualty of violence. He was consumed by the very system he tried to fight. The music industry, the fake friends, the creeping ghosts of West Kingston, and the spiritual fog that clouded his household. His story is not one of martyrdom alone, but of abandonment. He was a prophet disowned by his disciples, a revolutionary turned recluse, a man whose flame was extinguished not on a battlefield, but in his own living room. There were no headlines that could capture the full scale of the tragedy. Only whispers, only memories, only a grave, 3 chains from a pigsty, where the man who once thundered for justice was finally silenced. Was Peter Tosh's downfall the result of betrayal by friends, or something even darker? Can the forces we can't see truly decide the fate of legends? Tell us what you believe in the comments. We want to hear your theories and thoughts. And if you want more untold stories that history forgets, make sure you subscribe. New revelations are always on the way.